From the mountains of northern New Mexico comes a story older than memory, where legends walk beside men, where wolves guard ancient secrets. This is The Pack Warriors. This is The Pack Warriors, Episode 11, Sunrise, by Nicholas Coakley and Michele Pollock Dalton, narrated by Rick Barr, published by Barr 26 Publishing, LLC. Copyright 2025, all rights reserved. An eerie stillness permeated the air at the grounds of Curatum Leporum in Taos, New Mexico, after dark. The breeze stilled, and darkness pressed the shadows into swirling shapes that mesmerized some and terrified others. Anxious to depart after a tense encounter with a half-dozen motorcycle miscreants, team leader Aquil Mason gathered his crew of researchers with a few terse calls. "Come on, guys, let's get loaded up before those wolves decide to make a visit." "Dogs," ecologist Hyacintha Martinez corrected. "Or maybe coyotes," she allowed. Scuttling past, Alba Yeager hopped into the researcher's van and slid the side door closed with finality. "Those weren't dogs," she yelled from inside as she rattled around, resettling the equipment that had been disturbed. "If those were dogs, someone needs to check their breeding records, because domestic canines don't synchronize calls like that." Hyacintha ignored the boy genius's comment, but she gave Ursus a playful shove as she walked past. As she approached the rental car, Aquil popped up and searched the scarred landscape. "Ethan in the van?" he tiredly questioned. Cintha shrugged. "Unlikely. That's Alba's domain, and she hates squatters." Aquil grunted, scanning the shadows pooling beyond the parking lot lights. "Well then, where the hell is he?" The team's hazard management guy, Lux Williamson, thumped the hood of the car as he walked past. "He's not in the van. Trust me. Alba won't even let me inside until she's done cataloging the damage." "Great," Aquil muttered. He rubbed at the bridge of his nose, fatigue lining his features. "Somebody check the restrooms. Ursus, scan the grounds near the trailhead. Cintha—" She groaned. Don't say visitor center." But Aquil was already nodding in that direction. Cintha swore under her breath. "If that idiot's poking around in there after dark—" She rubbed the chill from her bare arms and started across the lot. Ursus fell in beside her, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Odds are he's in there studying the advanced composition of a dust mote. Give him a week, and he'll publish a paper proving the janitor's been underestimating fungal diversity for decades." Cintha didn't smile. The wolves, dogs, coyotes, whatever, had rattled her more than she cared to admit. The closer they drew to the doors of the visitor center, the tighter her shoulders bunched. The building loomed, windows reflecting the night sky. "Ethan!" she called, voice sharp. The mural held Ethan's full attention as he studied each minute detail in the low light of the still room. He'd researched the facts, and he'd listened to the tragic tale the docents shared. Their accounts of the Lupos' destruction at the hands of raging flames carried the high drama of Shakespearean theater. Their pat phrases and timed delivery were meant to wring sympathy, but the historical record was vacant of such detail. And the longer he stared, the less the official narrative satisfied him. How could anyone know such detail? Whose memories had survived, and whose were erased? Where is the other side of the story? The defeated never write the narrative, he thought. Victors carve their version into people's memories and teach it as truth. His lip curled faintly. There had to be more historical context, details sanitized from the record. A wayward thought blossomed in his mind. War might have been avoided. Sharpening his gaze, he fixed his eyes on the flames beneath the pyre. In his mind's eye, the mural rippled, its sharp contrast fading. The fire guttered, leaving soft tendrils of smoke to trail harmlessly toward a cloudless sky. Spears lowered, and the women and children walked out of the village in a calm procession, packs slung across their shoulders. Horror faded from their faces, and resolve settled in its place. Their steps steady, they marched in an orderly line toward a future they seemed ready to accept. The sacrificial stakes and burned corpses dissolved, leaving men and boys in their place. The warriors laid down their weapons with solemn care, as if handing them over willingly. Pools of blood faded, the ground unscarred by battle or defeat. Bodies were whole. It was a transition of power, not the decimation of a people. Orderly, inevitable. Ethan exhaled, and the tightness in his chest uncoiled. That made sense. That was the shape history should have taken. Not chaos, not carnage, just clarity and resolute leadership. What had been recounted as slaughter might have been revision, a transition mistaken for tragedy, necessity dressed as a fateful choice. He almost smiled. At last, the narrative held together. Neat, systematic, stripped of sentiment. "Ethan?" The voice broke into his satisfied contemplations. Olivia hovered near the doorway with Cintha and Ursus, arms wrapped tightly around herself. The last traces of daylight had bled from the windows, and every sound made her flinch. She hated being on the grounds after dark. "You coming? Everyone's ready to go," Cintha testily called. Ethan blinked, the revision his mind had painted bleeding back into the illustrated horror. He adjusted his pack, irritation pricking as if the interruption had torn him from some profound thought. "Yeah." The trio near the door urged the preoccupied man forward. The door swung shut behind them, and the visitor center sank restfully into the quiet. The absence of life settled into a vacuum of silence. Then, a faint creak rolled through the wall. A thin crack darkened at the seam where plaster met baseboard, and something thick welled up. A bead of black ooze bulged, stretched, and slipped to the floor, tracing a slow path across the tile before vanishing into a drain. A moment later, the weapons case across the gallery fogged. A soft bloom of condensation spread across the display case, clouding the shapes within. The mist held for several seconds, as though a breath pressed against the glass from the inside. Then it cleared, leaving the exhibit untouched. Shadows moved as clouds passed over the moon, rippling soundlessly across the floor. Unseen. Waiting. John eased the front door shut behind the departing home health nurse and gathered the items his father requested from the built-in glass display cases that separated the dining space from the living room. The scent of pine smoke and old paper hung in the air, as if the walls remembered every winter his family had spent there. Before proceeding down the short hallway to his father's makeshift sick room, John paused in the kitchen to gather a few convenience items. Then his stockinged feet traced the familiar path to Dr. Smith's sanctuary. "No arguments. Eat it," John said as he handed over the plastic cup of butterscotch pudding. Dr. Smith eyed the treat, and he rasped, "Did you bring them?" Reluctantly, the ex-Marine surrendered the two small items, laying them alongside the forgotten pudding. "My notes," his father prompted, the request hissing a little when combined with the sound of air passing through the oxygen mask. Light pine paneling, burnished gold over time, reflected the warmth of the bedside lamp, and John watched his father's reflection in the darkened windows across the room. "Do you recognize this?" his father asked, holding up a small silver trinket tarnished with age. "If I didn't, you wouldn't be holding it," John reminded as he settled into a boxy recliner next to the bed. "Aldonka," Dr. Smith murmured. "I know, Dad." The elderly man leaned back against his pillows and closed his eyes. "Tell me then, John. Tell me as if I didn't already know." On the verge of refusing, John swallowed his protest as he watched his father's desperate struggle to draw a satisfying breath. After releasing a deep sigh that belied his exhaustion and grief, John began in a clipped tone. Matthias Alonso arrived in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in the fall of 1579 with a new bride, and a freshly signed grant that accorded him 1,500 acres along the spine of what we call the Rio Pueblo de Taos. His only child, a daughter, was born in the spring of 1581. Aldonka, Dr. Smith confirmed. She wrote in the margins, John, not just the history, but her life, her grief, her hopes. The patient paused to catch his breath before rasping. I can still feel her in the strokes of the pen. His eyes, fever bright, flicked to his son, and he patted the 3-ring binder that sat atop the hospital tray table covering his lap. This is how we know what was lost. John swallowed a yawn. He'd heard it all before in 100 retellings. Yet in his father's weakened voice, the words carried a different weight. Dr. Smith's gaze drifted back to the binder, his low voice dropping into a reverent hush. Bright sun took them down the mountain that night. Aldonka and Bluefoot's daughters. The brave knew they couldn't outrun the warriors with little ones in their arms, so he turned back, alone, made himself the shield. Dr. Smith's hand closed into a fist, trembling against the blanket. He bought them time with his life. Every word Aldonka Alonso Rivera wrote is heavy with the details of his sacrifice. Their escape. John stood and crossed the room to stare out the windows that would greet the sunrise. He'd memorized the tale of Aldonka's escape before he could even read, but his chest still tightened when he recalled the woman's brave flight. Bright Sun was the kind of hero fathers wanted their sons to become, the sort of hero William Smith wanted his son to become. Dr. Smith's voice sharpened. It didn't end there. Generations unbroken. He lifted his eyes, fixing them on John. Us. You. He rasped with finality. John shifted uneasily. I know, Dad. We've practiced this 1,000 times. His tone was flat, not defiant, just weary and scared. His father didn't know that the ancestral line would end with John. And he never will, the ex-Marine stubbornly determined. There was no need for his father's dreams to be crushed by the seeds of reality. Then we'll practice 100 more, Dr. Smith coughed, his voice cracking but resolute. Because it must be remembered. The blood that might have been stamped out runs in us. The line that was never meant to survive is here. Now, he said, pounding his chest. The Lupos live on. Through me. Through you. They had hidden near the trees, where the pinon and juniper grew close enough to lengthen the deepest shadows of the night. The low earthen pit, roofed with poles and brush, was as cool as a cellar. Aldonka Alonso huddled in the dark, knees pressed to her chest, Bluefoot's daughters clinging to her skirts. Katori, nearly 10, held her little sister close and whispered soft comfort, though her own voice trembled. Kachina whimpered now and then, burying her face against Aldonka's stiff bodice to block out the shouts that carried faintly through the night. A shadow crossed the slats above them, and the cover protecting the food cache shifted. Aldonka's heart beat a violent rhythm against her ribs as she clamped one hand over the silver Franciscan cross tucked beneath her ruffled neckline. After several nudges that forced the ground cover away from the opening, an enormous wolf's head thrust through, its amber eyes glowing against the blackness. The beast's size alone froze Aldonka, the breadth of its shoulders, the mass of its ruff. The predator's coat was dark chocolate overlaid with hints of auburn, which caught the moonlight, and lighter cream marked the tip of its muzzle, highlighting the deadly fangs. Aldonka gasped and pulled the little girls tighter to her side as tears of terror filled her eyes. Then Katori stirred against her arm, her breath hitching. But it was not fear that lit the child's ebony eyes. The girl's small hand touched Aldonka's sleeve. "Don't be afraid," she whispered. "He is a protector of the people." The wolf dipped his head, a low huff vibrating from deep in his chest. His gaze flicked from Aldonka to the forest beyond. Then, with careful precision, he gripped Kachina's tunic in his teeth and lifted the child up and out of the pit as gently as if he carried his own pup. Katori scrambled after him, and Aldonka rose last, every nerve tight with dread. "Where are you, screaming eagle?" her mind cried out, desperate for the chieftain's protection. Outside, the night pressed cool against her face. The village lay several hundred yards behind them, and the looming forest ahead was shadowed and deep. The massive wolf stood waiting, Kachina balanced easily between his shoulders, Katori dwarfed at his side. His ears pricked forward, and his amber eyes met Aldonka's, urgent but not unkind. Then he turned and padded silently into the forest. The young woman hesitated for the space of a single breath. Then she gathered her skirts and stumbled after the animal. Aldonka faltered after only a few steps, her dress snagging on a low branch. Her mind screamed at her to run back toward the safety of the village, toward her husband, Screaming Eagle, but she would not, could not, abandon the children. She stumbled forward, whispering prayers against the fear hammering her ribs. Aldonka's gown, proper enough for her father's house, had never been appropriate for the Lupos village, and it was even less so when murder and mayhem stalked her every step. Her bodice felt too tight, and her outer skirt was a weight that impeded her flight. She paused, fumbling at the ties with trembling fingers, and pulled the garment free. The heavy embroidered wool fell into the duff, swallowed by the underbrush. Uneasily, she stood in her linen shift and kirtle, scandalously plain by her father's standards, but mercifully free. The cool air kissed her ankles, and she could move again. Not fit for a senora of Alonso blood, but suitable for survival. Scurrying to catch up, she caught the elder girl's arm. "Katori," she whispered hoarsely, "you cannot know this beast. It is a wolf, nothing more." The girl's ebony eyes lifted to hers, steady even in the shadows. "Our chief trusts him. My mother trusts him. Bright Sun is a warrior, a guardian of the people." Aldonka's throat tightened. Bright Sun? Her bridegroom's closest friend? "You've named this animal after one of your chieftain's most trusted warriors?" she whispered, but the massive beast turned his head, his gaze falling on Aldonka. She knew Bright Sun's quick laughter and the way his demeanor shifted when weighty counsel was required. But she also remembered the way his eyes caught the light at odd times, as though the sun had struck fire inside them. Aldonka had dismissed it as a trick of the light or her own foolishness. However, as the enormous wolf paused to glance back at her, the truth seemed to flare. His eyes glowed a deep, molten amber, the very shade she had puzzled over several times. Not a trick, nor her imagination. Her heart stumbled in her chest. Could it be? She clutched the silver cross tucked beneath her bodice, whispering half a prayer, half a plea. "Madre de Dios, what are you?" The animal returned to Aldonka's side, his gaze nearly level with her own, and he watched her for a long, breathless moment. Then he abruptly turned, ears pricking toward the slope below. His request was not in words, but she felt it as surely as if he'd spoken. "Follow." Aldonka's disbelief did not vanish, but it cracked. Timidly, she placed a palm onto the coarse fur near Katori's, and she did as bid, each footfall a surrender to the impossible. The woods swallowed them whole. Pinon and juniper closed above their heads, branches black against the bruised sky as the night sounds grew silent with their approach. Bright Sun moved with quiet purpose, his paws sure on the uneven ground, his great ruff brushing the undergrowth. Dozing, Kachina clung to his neck, her face buried in his fur, while Katori paced beside him, as steady as if the action were a daily occurrence. The angry shouts of men and crying of children faded, but Aldonka felt eyes on her back, the sensation turning her stomach. The air was cleaner as they moved downhill, but the scent of burnt flesh clung in her nostrils. Still, she forced her feet to move, exhaustion weighing her legs, breathing ragged in her chest. At intervals, Bright Sun halted, His ears twitched, muzzle lifted to test the wind. Then, with a flick of his head, he pressed onward, angling them toward the western slopes. Aldonka did not question his direction. She had none of her own. Her world had narrowed to the rhythmic beat of his paws, the glow of his amber eyes when he turned to check on them, and the bristle of the fur she clenched in one fist. Once, when they reached a dry arroyo, Bright Sun dropped Kachina gently to the ground and bound across the wash, nose low, tracing some hidden sign. He returned swiftly, nudging them forward, then took the child back on his shoulders as if the delay had never happened. The hours stretched. The moon slid behind scudding clouds, throwing the woods into blacker shadow. Each rustle of leaves set Aldonka's pulse racing. Every owl's cry made her clutch Bright Sun's chocolate coat even tighter. Near dawn, they reached a narrow ravine where water whispered faintly among the stones. Bright Sun led them into its shelter, paws splashing silently in the trickle. He pressed them into the lee of a rock outcropping, his eyes never still, his nose twitching at the shifting currents in the air. Aldonka gathered the girls close, stroking damp hair back from their faces, whispering prayers half in Spanish, half in broken Latin. When the girls dozed against her, she raised her eyes to the wolf's silhouette. He stood like a sentinel, muscles taut, tail low but ready. In his amber scrutiny, she saw no mercy, no softness. Neither did she see a threat. He was a blade pointed outward, not at them. Her disbelief wavered again. "Bright Sun," she whispered, her voice too low for the children to hear. "If you are truly the man I know, why do you wear this form?" The wolf's ears flicked. For an instant, he turned his eyes on her, steady and unblinking. She felt the answer like a weight in her chest. Not words, just a truth she could not yet name. Then he turned away, muzzle lifted toward the sunrise and the ridge above. Moments later, a distant shout split the silence. Another answered it, closer this time. Aldonka's blood turned to ice. Bright Sun growled low, teeth bared in the half-light. He nudged her sharply with his muzzle, driving her and the children deeper down the ravine. His amber eyes burned into hers, fierce with urgency. "Go." She gathered the girls, heart hammering. Behind her, the wolf bounded toward the sound of the interlopers, vanishing into the dark trees. His growl rose into a roar, answered by the clash of men's voices, followed by a sharp yip. Aldonka did not look back. She grabbed the girl's hands and ran. This has been The Pack Warriors, Episode 11, Sunrise, by Nicholas Coakley and Michele Pollock Dalton. Narrated by Rick Barr. Published by Barr 26 Publishing, LLC. Copyright 2025, all rights reserved. You've been listening to The Pack Warriors audio drama written by Michele Pollock Dalton and Nicholas Coakley. Narrated by Rick Barr. Join the Pack at thepackwarriors.com and explore the legends, lore, and stories that inspired this world. New episodes arrive every Monday. Until then, keep the fire burning. And remember, Monday doesn't have to bite.